Well, hello and welcome back to the channel. This is effectively a part 2 continuation of the Emira drive video. I had always intended to do a back-to-back comparison between the two cars, but it would have made the original video far too long, so I decided to split them up into two. I tend to find that back-to-back comparisons shed interesting light on both cars, and so it proved to be in this case as well, which started with parking the two cars closely together. You can see actually the roof lines are almost identical in height, bearing in mind the GT430 does ride lower than an Evora 400, so perhaps we can speculate that faster Emiras in the future will ride lower still. Anyway, I hope you find the comparison interesting in some way, and I just wanted to say many thanks for all those who have watched the previous video, and especially to those who have made very encouraging comments. It's much appreciated. I guess let's fire it up and take it out. Gearbox, gear shift feels very familiar. I could do with lower seats or sitting lower, definitely. I don't have a great deal of headroom here. This is the seats on the lowest setting. I can tilt them back further like that, which is pretty reclined. So in terms of a headroom test, this is where we are with the Evora with the race seats, and I find there's enough room there for a helmet, because I've worn a helmet in here a few times. You can't, of course, lower the seats any more than this, but you can see why I wouldn't want a higher seat in an Evora, which the Sparco seats do sit higher. So it's not night and day actually any better than an Evora to get in and out of, if I'm being honest, but obviously a massive improvement over an Exige or Elise. Now in terms of getting in and out in comparison, now with these seats, these carbon race seats, it is harder to get in and out. The advantage of the Sparco seat is you sit higher relative to this sill, so sliding in and out is easier. With the race seats, I'm sitting below this sill and I have these bits of car to clamber over, so it is a bit harder, but I use the same technique really. Let's put all my weight on the sill here and just spring out. So that bit isn't too difficult, but you can see your backside sits quite a bit lower beneath this sill, whereas the Sparco seat is a bit higher. So the sill was reduced on these Evora 400, post Evora 400 cars to make access easier. But again, these make it a lot harder. But yeah, with the Sparco seats, I don't think this is much harder to get in and out of than an Emira personally. So again, the Evora's rotary controls are often criticised. This is a more modern climate control type setup, and it blows an absolute gale through these vents. But anyway, I'm glad at least it has physical buttons as well as the touch screen. That's a good thing. Give you an idea how quiet this system is. It's fantastically quiet. It really whispers. It's very finely adjustable, so you have fan speed, temperature, and where it comes out of. I suppose you could argue that that should have been there, because it would have been easier to read. But it's actually a really simple, really good system. It's night and day better than anything you'll find in an Exige or Elise. And despite the criticism of this being old-fashioned, I actually think it works just as well as the system in the Emira. I definitely prefer this to a push button, which I know for some viewers will find that unbelievably old-fashioned, but I get along better with this. It's very simple. I haven't really been able to extend it yet, but obviously it is much quieter than the Evora. I don't think that's a bad thing. The Evora is borderline antisocial at times, and you do feel like overtaking old ladies. You have to keep it under 4,500 revs. But there is a lovely mid-engined feel to the steering response. Steering doesn't, mainly because of the steering wheel, doesn't feel exactly the same as the Evora's, but there's a lovely change of direction. The gearbox doesn't feel any different to the Evora really to me. I can't notice any sort of improvement there. Visibility is great, wing mirrors are great. Visibility is definitely improved over the Evora, and the reversing camera on here is a fantastic addition and useful for any car with limited rear visibility. That's one of the modern tech features that I really do, see the benefit of. You can see why a reversing camera would be a good thing. So yeah, it's got a nice level of performance. It's a nice car generally. It's without question, I'm actually surprised at how much more intense the Evora pulls. I know it's a GT430, but I also know a lot of people that don't believe there really is 30 more horsepower that most people believe. The Evora 400 series cars are all identically powered. I can really notice it in the mid-range. This car's carrying extra weight. I can notice the mid-range is a bit blunted. It doesn't have that eagerness to pull. And it definitely gets going above 5,000. Feels more top-ended. I thought between you and me that I was going to feel a little bit disappointed in how rapid this was going to feel, as in there isn't much in it, and that is not the case. I will attempt to try and get some sort of time to compare, but it feels like quite a step to the 430. It feels like quite a step more feral, more angry, more wild. This is a much milder car, intentionally so, and I can see the benefits of that. It's supposed to be a more daily usable car, not a wild track focused special. Now I am comparing it to a very extreme, very high spec Evora, the ultimate Evora, and that is very unfair in terms of from a pure driver's point of view. There's no question this is an easier car to live with every day, or this would be an easier car to live with every day, and that's what Lotus wanted. That was Lotus's primary goal. Their goal wasn't to make a better or faster performance car than the Evora, especially GT430. I'm comparing a car towards the end of its production life to a car at the very beginning. However, there is a snag, and that is that actually this is a 90 grand car now with extras over £90,000. So actually it is a choice of a new one of these or a GT430. For a little bit more you could get a GT430 which will not lose money. This will. That will drive, it will be a much more thrilling, more intense, more engaging driver's car on the road and more capable track car, but that's the GT430. You could get yourself a GT410 Evora and save quite a bit of money and have more of a visceral, purer sports car drive than this. So I think that's where it gets tricky because of the price inflation on this car. That whole choice has become more difficult, and if it was your only car, I can see why you might go for one of these if it was your daily driver. However, I don't buy a Lotus for that, but I don't want to take anything away from this car. It's a really nice car to drive. It's surprisingly different. I totally get it why someone would have one of these, and I totally get why the people that do have these love them and rave about them. It's fabulous, but it is a slightly more muted version of an outrageously loud car, so I can actually live with that. I think for a more daily usable car, that's a reasonable compromise. I think they've hit quite a nice balance with that. This car's on the Goodyear tyres, and the ride, I think, for a sports car is perfectly acceptable, if perhaps not quite as smooth as you might expect for a daily Lotus, but it handles rough roads really well, so as you'd expect. But yeah, I'm just slightly surprised the steering response is perhaps sharper, yet there appears to be less feel and feedback, which I was not expecting at all, given this is the same hydraulic system. These stalks, I mean, are they really that much better than the Evora Ford Focus stalks? Not really. Very obviously Ford Focus stalks. The upside of that being they are there's good functionality on the, you've got good adjustment on the intermittent wiper and all that sort of stuff. Now, while I don't have anything like the same level of information as you get on an Emira, you do have this screen here which gives you a timer, which I've never used. It gives you your range in miles, it gives you your instant MPG, your average MPG, you can set trips, and the most useful of all is this tyre pressure monitoring. That's really essential, but I know the Emira does that too. The one area I would say you can notice that stuff has come from different places. You can see there's a different colour and brightness to these switchgear. You can see these are Ford parts. At night you can dim the panels here, but you can't dim these buttons here or that, so they're all a little bit bright. They're not consistent with that, so you do have a slight, you can see the difference here between these and that. So that's where the parts bin element is showing, but I think, bearing in mind everything else you get, features such as this, fully adjustable five-way traction control, adjustable to 5 different levels of slip. It's an incredibly advanced system. Very few cars have that. So I've spent quite a bit of time in this car now, and I've grown to like this car an awful lot actually. It's a really nice car. It's a fantastic manual, rear-wheel drive, supercharged V6 coupe, no question about that. And about as good an example of that as you'll get. I think it's a bit more supercharger whine, possibly, than I'm used to. That might be because I'm slightly closer to the engine, not sure. But if you keep the revs up on this, it's not going, it should stay with an Evora 400, certainly, a 410. But the 430 just builds more intensity on top of the stronger, lower down pull. It's a wonderful car for a B road. The damping is excellent for a sports car. It's got masses of grip, resists roll very well, really, in terms of road driving, certainly. And it is essentially exactly the same as the 410 engine in an Evora or Exige, but just clipped at the top, which I don't think they needed to do that, to be honest. I think they can only have done that to make headroom for a faster version, which will come out in due course. I guess the other thing was longevity of all the parts of the supercharger and the engine. So a pretty brutal cutout, really. That would unsettle a car on track if you hit the cutout. So you want to pay attention to your shift lights. That throws weight forward onto the nose. I'd prefer a softer cutout, but this one is pretty brutal at 6.8. The lack of revs is not as big of an issue as I thought perhaps it might have been. Having actually driven it now, again, because of the manic scream of the supercharger, there is at least the feeling of doing high RPM, even if it isn't. Nothing. But where it really comes alive is the corners. It wants to corner. It's a proper Lotus in that regard. It's got this appetite for cornering. It's not at all about straight line speed. It loves to be tipped into a corner. Yeah, that's where I'm surprised how different the steering feels to the Evora, and I wonder, is it the larger front wheels as a possibility? So, corners. Yeah, it feels like a proper Lotus in the corners. Yeah, because the steering does actually feel slightly faster off-centre. The car does tend to tip into corners a little bit. So the very first bit is quite calm, but then it does sort of tend to tip into corners a little bit more. The way that my Evora's weight transfer is so smooth side to side. Good man. This doesn't have that quite. But if you ask me if I'm enjoying it on a road like this, yes, without question. It's a fabulous car to drive. So here we are in a relaxed cruise. I've got a little bit of wind noise coming from my left, from around here, but otherwise it's quiet. Is it any quieter than the Evora? I don't think it is much actually. I don't think they've gone crazy with the sound deadening. Is it actually that much of a better GT than the Evora? I think possibly not, really. But really enjoyed driving it. I really enjoyed my day. Fascinating car. Surprisingly different to the Evora overall. And now I'm going to jump straight back in the GT430 and give you an immediate back-to-back thing. But I'm already looking forward to the analog dials. But now it's back to the Evora. So, there we go, straight back in the 430. I did find out that that Emira I just tried was with a Tour suspension, so that in itself is rather interesting. Because getting straight back in this does not feel overly harsh. Surprisingly so, actually. I thought, particularly after a Tour specified Emira, this would feel very lumpy immediately. That's the first thing. And I have to say, I do prefer the steering. It's almost slightly gentler in response, but slightly more linear. I'm not sure how clear that is, how much sense that makes, but I slightly prefer it. It's slightly more accurate and precise, if not quite as sharp or aggressive. But if you want this car to turn in quicker, you just turn in a bit more angle. The Emira almost had a slight lurch, possibly, you could say. I say slight, compared to almost any other car. It's hard to fault in terms of handling the Emira. It was really, really nice. But this, I usually sit lower. That's because of these seats. And I have to say, these seats, again, coming straight out of an Emira, I thought these seats would feel hard, bony, rigid, and, you know, tight. I have to say, these seats fit me really well. So I have no issue there. So obviously the car is firm, but actually it feels like there's real ride quality here. So again, there's just a slightly more natural steering response. Small steering angles give a small effect on the car. I wasn't expecting that. I wasn't expecting to prefer the steering on the Evora. I thought there would be no difference between the cars at all in that regard. A lot has been made of the higher gear stick in the Emira. I mean, it's slightly higher. It feels like it might be an inch or something. It's a tiny amount different. So I can't really see how the higher gear stick is a major improvement. The gearbox linkage feels exactly the same. These instruments now already have retro charm and appeal, I have to say. To what degree it's the lower weight or the extra power, this car has an urgency and an eagerness, straight away a punch, and that isn't even full throttle. At lower RPM, the Emira has this sort of thing at 4.5 where it really gets going. This here, this car, this engine, at 2000 on a light throttle in sport, has a real strong surge forward. So on top of higher peak power and higher revs, on top of a stronger top end, this gets going earlier and pulls stronger all the way through the revs. It's immediately noticeable, I have to say, more so than I thought it would be. And this is a pretty awful road here, actually. This is one of the worst roads for surface I could go on. And at very low speed here, 30 odd miles an hour, the car is feeling very uncompromising. It's not uncomfortable. This is where the Emira with the Tour suspension would go, but would go better, but it wasn't the magic carpet I was expecting. I was expecting it to be on a par with the Series 1 Evora, and I don't think it is. So I have no doubt the Emira would be better on this particular road. This is really awful. It's one of the worst sections of road I know. But short of that, I'm astonished at the ride quality that you get with this one on the road. It's really surprising. I thought that would be one of the biggest differences between them. That would be night and day. Not so. So does it feel cheap and antique in here? For me, not at all. It really doesn't. The air conditioning is ice cold. So yeah, I've come back. I've got back in this, and the specialness of this model in particular is really hits home when you do it back to back. As much as I like the Emira, this is the one. The Emira, a fantastic car to own for a few years. This is keeper material, so it's an absolute privilege and a joy. There is a wild, feral side to this that the Emira never quite matches. Although again, I think there's less supercharger whine actually in this. It's there, but it's not so obvious. Good grief. Yeah, this motor, if that motor goes in an Emira, it's going to be special. It's going to be great, and you'll notice the difference. You really will. It's a really strong version of the 400 motor that many people know and love. It's a fantastic engine, so much character, and strong pull right the way through the rev range. But this one seemed to go a little bit berserk after 6, on top of pulling stronger earlier. So yeah, I'm still Team Evora. There's no doubt about that. So just by way of conclusion then, I enjoyed my time with the Emira a great deal. Perhaps slightly more than I was expecting overall. I thought by making it a more rounded car, Lotus would have diluted the experience to the point where the car became more ordinary, perhaps too ordinary. So in direct comparison with the ultimate and most special Evora, I can confirm that that is not the case. The level of performance almost defines what is plenty enough for the road. However, I do think compromises were made in order to try and keep costs down. An obvious example being the choice of 2 fixed rate dampers. A cutting edge adaptive system, or at least adjustable dampers, would have fixed this at a single stroke. I'm pretty convinced that this was part of the original plan for the car, but build costs were spiralling and they had to make some hard choices, which is why, to some degree, the Emira is Lotus holding back. Whereas with the GT430, you get the impression that Lotus gave it everything. The result is that the Emira is a great car to own for a couple of years, then trade in for the faster one. It's better suited for people who like to chop and change their cars more often, and to be fair, probably to drive their cars more often too. But the GT430 is straight up keeper material. For me at least, the novelty has failed to wear off. It still feels special and inspiring to drive each and every time. If anything, my enjoyment and appreciation of the car has only increased over time and with comparison to other cars.